This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granick-Allen. Housing is a pressing issue amongst Canadians. Between housing supply and affordability, many younger Canadians are wondering if they will ever be able to break into the market and purchase a home. With this in mind, in 2022, the federal government created the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate, the FHA, to offer guidance on federal housing policy. But is the FHA creating more problems than it is solving, focusing on the concept of financialization and making allegations that racial discrimination in housing is widespread in Canada? Some critics are warning that the policy recommendations coming out of the FHA would be disastrous to Canada's already fragile housing market. So what should the government be focusing on when it comes to housing policy? Do we have racial discrimination in our housing market? Where do home ownership disparities actually lie? Which demographic owns homes in Canada and which one rents? Does it actually really matter? Joining me now to share his thoughts is Shawn Taylor, Senior Features Editor of the C2C Journal. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be back, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I actually had not heard of the Federal Housing Advocate. Can you tell us when and from where did this office emerge?
Sure. This is part of the Trudeau government's broader housing policy. I guess it was opened in 2022. There's only been one federal housing advocate so far. It's Marie-Josée Houle. She doesn't have a background that would that really speaks to a deep knowledge of the housing market. She's more of an advocate or an activist. And if you look at they've been quite prolific. The Federal Housing Advocate's Office has produced quite a few reports and studies, etc. But if you look at it, the kinds of things that Houle is recommending are really dangerous for Canada's housing market. And you really hope that the federal government isn't listening to the advice of the Federal Housing Advocate, because it's absolutely the worst possible advice one could imagine. In particular, she's fixated on the fact that people make a profit selling housing, which is we talk about a housing market. A market is buyers and sellers, and the sellers make their living satisfying buyers.
Right.
But Houle is dead set against profit making in the housing market, what she calls financialization, which doesn't really have a clear definition, but she's really against it. And she wants to change tax laws so that REITs are basically eliminated as a force in the housing market. Other things like national rent control, all these things would really make it difficult for any private sector entity to want to be in the housing market. I think that's really dangerous for Canada's housing supply.
Now, I want to unpack, I mean, you gave us a very good overview, and there's so many things that I'm just chomping at the bit to unpack. Let's talk about Marie-Josée Houle for a moment, because you're right, the background, if you will, or the pedigree of this individual will really direct the policies coming out of this office. So you mentioned that she doesn't have a housing background. What is her background?
Well, I know she used to be a professional accordion player. It comes from sort of the social justice activist community, and that sort of informs the sorts of things she wants. She doesn't really understand how the housing market works, especially since she seems to dislike the entire concept of a market. She doesn't want anyone to make a profit. She thinks everything should be sort of non-profit in the housing market, and so you're just not going to get any capital if everything is going to be co-ops and government provided. We're not going to be able to deliver the housing supply that Canada needs. So she's the wrong person.
That sounds to me like
advice.
That sounds to me like she's requesting a basically socialist housing policy, like that the government owns all the housing.
Absolutely. If you get rid of all the private profit, who do you have left? Well, nonprofit agencies and the public sector. But there's no way that you could expect those entities to deliver the kind of housing we need. So, I talk to developers and people that participate in the housing market, and the federal housing advocate just makes them so mad because
Okay,
it sort of denigrates their whole reason
industry.
for being, that
Okay, I'm going to
it's
pause you
evil
there,
to make a
Peter.
profit.
We have to cut to commercial. We'll be right back.